seconds to play, and Bruce Tate doesn't know that. The game's going to end on this play. He fires downfield. It's caught. And into the end zone. Goes to the end zone. Lobs it to the far corner. Offset eye. Ross throws a block for Sargent. He's going to crawl over that goal line. Hurdles in for a touchdown.
How's it going, everybody and Hawk fans? Welcome into the Play the Fight Song family, into the Iowa Hawkeye fan perspective. Ready to kick off spring, ready to kick off all the talks on everything from Kirk Ferentz's press conference last week that I got a chance to listen to a couple times this week, as well as some other things that have gone around the program. Pumped to be here, pumped to get the first one in. A little late notice, got to get one in. I felt before the end of the week, so I jammed it in here. Appreciate everybody tuning in. I know 5:30 is not the greatest time for everybody, for me even, but it was really nice to get a chance to actually get on here and talk. Prior to the next press conference we'll get from Kirk, other news coming out. So cover our bases, give us a nice 20 to 30-minute talk on the Iowa Hawkeyes here in the spring. Again, thank you for tuning in to the Play the Fight Song Network. If you are on YouTube, subscribe over there. Facebook, like the page. We have links to all our platforms across everything. So feel free to give it a like. We're also on Apple Music or Apple Podcast and Spotify. Feel free to give that a look. Pumped to jump in. So let's jump in right now. First things first, I got a chance to listen to Kirk's presser. No Tim Lester availability. There's no Phil Parker availability, no player availability last week. It was all Kirk Ferentz, about a 30 to 40 minute presser, just kind of addressing the program and where everything is. And you got a lot of Kirk answers. You're going to get beaten around the bush. You're going to get coach talk. You're going to get questions that are asked, and he kind of just sways the other way and goes talks on something else. For example, he was talked about kind of the depth chart and what the quarterback situation was and how many snaps they were going to get, which is rightfully so. The fan base would love to know how the snaps are being handled in the spring. And he was like, well, everybody's got to get better. You know, the defense, especially our veteran guys. And it's like, no, I just want you to answer the question, Kirk. But again, that's what we've come to expect out of Kirk, and so I wasn't too surprised by too much. The first thing to kind of jump into, put a bow on this, get by it. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Comments on the portal and Caden Proctor. I thought it was interesting. I don't think Kirk said Caden Proctor one time in the presser. If he was asked, he said we had a player or we had a kid or we had a person. It's just consistently. He wasn't saying his name even. It was kind of interesting to listen to him talk about it. He didn't sound like he had a lot of ill will. He wasn't really upset about it. If he wasn't making it known. But I think the biggest one that came away from it is he's like, if a kid doesn't want to be here, that's fine. Like, we don't want him here either. You're just wasting everybody's time. You're wasting your time. You're wasting my time. You're wasting your teammates' time, coach's time, prepping you for a game that you'll never play in, right? So he was kind of happy that if this thing was going to happen, that he didn't take practice reps around tackle, taking them from guys who need them and guys who are going to play on Saturdays in Iowa City. So that was a really kind of a different spin on it that I thought Kirk made it a really good point. And I was really happy to hear that as well. But when you talk the portal, like, he got a couple questions about the portal. If he was interested in jumping in the spring window, it starts in a couple weeks. He got a couple questions. Wants to add pieces, what he thinks about it just in general. And a lot of what he said was, you know, I'm worried about my team now. I'm worried about the guys we have now. We're worried about the guys that have committed to this program now. He's not worried about it. He's going to evaluate where his team is. And I get that. I do. And I think every coach kind of gets that, especially what we're a week into spring ball. And you really need to find out what you need and how to handle your team right now before you make any decisions. And I get that. But he did dismiss them pretty quickly. So I can see where he is coming from in that aspect. So would it be nice to see them jump in a portal and grab a guy or two? 100%. I 100% agree. Maybe you go grab a guy on the offensive line that's a veteran. Maybe you grab another piece of quarterback just in case. You go grab a guy at receiver or a playmaking running back, or, you know, just pieces. I feel like there's pieces there. But your knock always is, you know, remember the guys that he brought in. I brought in a Dejon Parker. You brought in a Rusty Feth. Those guys came in the spring, some in the summer, and he didn't think they got it. So they didn't get a fair shake at everything. And they weren't around is basically what it came down to. And Kirk wasn't a big fan of that. So we'll see how he attacks all of that. Again, just happy to put the bow on the Proctor thing and just get by it. And let's go to work with the guys we have and try to make them better. As we know that was a position group that needs a little help and needs to get some work done. here in the offseason. So touch on that quick. We'll also dive into the NIL stuff here. He said, NIL is kind of a lot. Like, it's a lot to handle, but overall, it's been really good for the sport. Sees it as more a retention piece than he does a recruiting piece. And I thought that's big. That's really what Kirk thinks. So he's not using it to go get these kids out of high school. He's not, showing the Swarm Collective or Brad Heinrichs isn't in these meetings saying, hey, here's X amount, we'll ship your way. It's to keep guys in Iowa City. It's to keep guys like Jay Higgins around another year. It's to Nick Jackson. Just go down the list of all the guys on the defense that decided to come back. It's retention, keep those guys around. And a little bit of that is also have to play into, like, Iowa's not in the boat for the most 4 or 5-star guys, right? These 5-star kids, they're going to have a little money influence to them. They can go anywhere in the country. So there's obviously all these programs are going to give them everything they want. So, and Iowa's not recruiting those kids. They're not getting a shot at those kids. If they are, they're out in early sessions and early lists from these kids. So it's not that big of a deal. But when retention is the reason you're using NIL, I do enjoy it. I do think the kid is getting what he deserves out of it. We're not just throwing money at a wall. Like a lot of people said, we were at Proctor, and it felt like we were at Proctor at one point. Turns out he didn't get that money. Nonetheless, like, you just kind of see this money thrown at the wall. And if a kid doesn't pan out or a kid doesn't want to stay more than a year, it's like, all this money, right, that we've raised or this company has given to the collective is gone. And you're never going to see it again. So it is different. And I think it's a different look at it than most coaches around the country, because most coaches don't want to talk about it. They don't want to deal with it. They're dealing with it on their own terms, not a presser or in other spots. So it's kind of interesting to really look at how differently Kirk looks at the sport, looks how to handle NIL, the transfer portal, offensive scheme and defensive scheme. Just the handling a program, being the CEO of an Iowa football program in general is way different than most people would around the country. So it's definitely, again, something I would pay attention to from that presser. It's the biggest one that biggest thing that I came away with was, like, retention more than recruiting, retention over recruiting. So that's kind of where he stood on the NIL stance. Let's jump into some offensive talk. I think that would be a big reason a lot of people wanted to see the spring presser, how it was going to unfold, how he was really going to handle the Tim Lester hire, how he's going to do installs. I got a question here from Jake. What's the one topic Kirk did not talk about that you wanted to hear? Great question. And I think I'll get to that here in a second. It kind of wraps right into this offensive scheme. What about question and he just didn't want to answer or avoid it, and kind of all in one? But the Tim Lester installs here, he's talking about the first couple of days, how this installing everything, and talked about kind of when Greg Davis came into the University of Iowa and how they handled that situation. A lot of the pass games stayed in Greg's language. A lot of the run games stayed in the Iowa program's language, and it kind of meshed it all together and kind of went that direction. He didn't dive as much into how Lester was doing that, but he said Lester's done a really, really good job. He's a good fit personality-wise as a human within the building, and I think that's number one for Kirk, right? You got to have a guy that fits this program, because it's not just like any program. It's run a little bit different. It's a little more, I wouldn't say uptight, but everything's really put together. And so the guy's got to fit, and he does fit. And it's all about how Lester gets comfortable to call plays is basically what it came down to for Kirk. So the language has got to be there for him to be able to run through plays. It's got to be there so the players can understand it and really digest all that stuff and lock it into their brain so they're able to do these things quickly on Saturdays. And I thought it was really good that he went through this and kind of explained how it was going. He said, yeah, it's going to be tougher at start, right? We're a week in. There's learning curves to everything. Lester's learning the program. Everybody's learning how to deal with Tim Lester's scheme, how we're going to handle it, language, formations, just go through all of it, right? It's tough. It's every position group. It's every coach on that side of the football. It's the head guy in Kirk that all has to learn this. And whether you sit there and say, well, it's got to be, let's hurry up. It's spring football. We're a week in. Like, it's going to take a little bit of time. There's no reason to think this is still a questionable hire or whatnot. Like, we're on the ropes here. Let's let this marinate. Let's let this be a part of the program. Let's have this bring Iowa success. So position group wise, they kind of talked about, along with the offensive side, the O-line without Proctor. It's going to be the same thing you saw last year. It sounded like he didn't want to move a lot of pieces around. Logan Jones, he was talking about, was coming off some surgery, so he's not getting a ton of spring snaps. but there's guys moving around just because of that. Like we have guys playing center who maybe haven't as much, but we're not moving tackles inside the guard. We're not moving guards outside the tackle. He's really trying to keep it where it is and just build that camaraderie, build that relationship between guys, and overall just make them better. Right? This has got to be a better unit if Iowa wants to win 9 games, 10 games, X amount of games, like fill in the blank. Right? And he talked about that, how like the offensive struggles last year, and what everybody talked about obviously was a lot to do with the offensive line. Like he came out and said it, and I was happy he said that. He said it hurt the offense. It basically, handcuffed everything they wanted to do. Is bad execution. It was just poor O-line play. It is basically what he said. He came out and said it, and I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of people would agree. And it's been like that for a couple years now. But the problem is that you've had the same guys, and it hasn't really gotten better, right? These are guys who played as freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and if it doesn't get better as seniors, I mean, when you miss on a couple of recruiting classes or guys leave, and it really adds up. It adds up on an offensive line where you have 5 guys that really need to solidify an offense to even make it work, especially in a scheme like Ferentz runs, right? This is not the easiest thing in the world to build. Like this takes time. And I think that's his biggest concern right now is that, Proctor didn't take snaps from people, but we've got to get better now, and it's got to happen quick. And so it'll be interesting to see how much better they getting that they're getting a new system, right? They're going to get new language. They're going to get new blocking schemes. But I think in a lot of ways, it's going to stay the same philosophy-wise. It's all the same philosophy. It's run the football to make sure we can get it through the air and play action. We can get the ball to our running backs who hopefully have the ability to make one guy miss in the hole, create their own path in some zone blocking schemes on the edge. And I'm fine with that. But if we can't play offensive line and we have no other way to score, we have no other way to move the football, problems arise. So jumping into the quarterbacks, this is the one thing, Jake, back to your question, that this is what I wish you would have addressed more. He was asked, all quarterbacks are kind of in different spots. How are they handling it? What do you kind of see right now? And he said, I want them all to progress. I want them all to get better. I would agree. They all need to get better. He didn't really address how the snaps were being taken. So Cade basically doesn't move very well right now. He can stand and throw the football, get some arm work in, but he's not able to run around and run this offense. So Deacon's listed 2 on the depth chart. That doesn't mean anything. It's a Kirk Ferentz depth chart. Doesn't mean anything. But how many snaps is Deacon getting compared to Marco? I would love to see Marco get 50% of that, if not more, because I don't think you're going to see Deacon get much better, and I think we understand that. Just putting your chips all into one basket, right? When Cade's been hurt twice since he's been on campus, twice, that's 2 times. Both really not good, hindered his ability to move. And then when you bring in a guy who literally cannot move, and he tries to run the offense, and he's fine to hand it off. He struggled through the air. He struggled to move in the pocket. He struggled to run the offense. And then you get a little life out of Marco, who didn't even get much snaps in the bowl game, right? And he's running around and just making plays, and everybody is like, well, what's going on? Yeah. I don't know if you know this or not, but modern college football quarterbacks are supposed to be able to move around a little bit. It's a crazy concept, I know. You're 2024 and we got quarterbacks that can move. Come on. But I just want Marco to get more snaps, and he didn't really address how they were handling that situation. And I really wanted to know, and maybe we'll know that here in a couple of weeks when he gives us a presser. We'll definitely know that in the spring game that comes on the 20th. But it's something to pay attention to, because it's a huge part of this offense. If we don't have a guy that can get the football to playmakers, we're in trouble. We don't have guys that can block. We're in trouble. So that's the position group stuff that I really wanted to pay attention to. And then kind of before I jump into the current win totals quickly, like I saw one thing on Twitter here, and I don't know how much weight it has behind it, and I don't really know if I believe the person tweeting it out. But there's Iowa accounts out there that tweet out things, may not have any sources. They think they know things, or they're just way of the wind. So if we're going to talk portal, right? Portal additions, people want to go get a quarterback. Somebody out there put out Lincoln Keenholz. This is a kid from South Dakota that went to Ohio State. You played in Ohio State's bowl game. Possibility hitting the portal. I mean, they have Julian Sayin, they have Will Howard. Like, they have pieces. Devin Brown in that quarterback room. He's not going to see the field, right? Probably not. He may not see it the year after. So him possibly hitting the portal is a big deal in a couple weeks, because it's a guy who's a former 4-star kid. He's local to the Midwest, and he's got some talent behind him. But to say that I was going to heavily push to him and go after him right now. And he hasn't even been in the portal. Portal's not open for another week or so. Like, I just feel like you're getting fed misinformation, right? If it's one account out there that's saying all this stuff and it's not any 24/7 guys or the guys that on three or your register guys, to just kind of go through the list, your normal Iowa reporters who do a really good job. If it's not coming from these guys, like, we're just wasting our time and getting our hopes up and not really locked into the program. And you're kind of falling into this false narrative that this guy has sources. So it's just something to pay attention to. Now, if it comes down the pipe and that ends up being something that happens, good, awesome. I'm not going to act like I wouldn't be in on it, but you need to understand that it's not just about the quarterback. Like, we need help on the offensive line more than anything. And I think that's where I'd like to see additions made that really plug and play guys here for a year or two off to the NFL, but help us right now. So that's kind of the position group stuff. I think the defense is going to be great. Again, how veteran you are with Castro and Jackson and Higgins. And he talked about, or Ferentz that is, talked about the defensive line, how it's not super deep, but it's a talented group. Like, it's a group that's going to really help you out. And so he's confident there as well. DB, you'd love to see him get a little bit better, a little more veteran, but they're in a good spot. And I don't think that's a worry. It's the offense that's getting a lot of the headlines. And again, we didn't get a lot of information out of this presser, but it is important to know that it's early and we're getting the temperature. We're taking the temperature of this program right now and where everything is. But talking about all that, some win totals have kind of started to roll out. You have Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Minnesota. I wrote all these down that we could talk about. If you're seeing win totals and you're looking at schedules, it kind of gives you a pulse of where people think this program is. Iowa's currently sits at 7.5, pretty juiced to the over, actually. So most people think they're going to go over that 7.5 mark. Looking at the schedule, Illinois State, Iowa State, Troy, Minnesota, Ohio State, Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland, Nebraska. I can find 8-9 wins in there, right? But I say that thinking the offense is going to improve, because you're not going to get the same luck and win 10 games as you did last year. Turnover luck's not always going to be your way. You're not always going to control the game, right? Like, this is 7.5, 8 wins. It should be the expectation every year for this team. And so if we can get one Illinois State, you can get Iowa State again this year, Troy, Minnesota, your tough ones that you really got to worry about, in my opinion, for next year, if we're going to circle some, Iowa State, you got to pay attention to. Ohio State, at Michigan State is going to be sneaky. Jonathan Smith's making that program so much better than it was the last couple of years. Anytime you play Wisconsin, that's gritty, and then Nebraska as well. So 4 or 5 games that are really toss-ups, or you can call them toss-ups, you can call them tough ones, but there's games on there that you got to pay attention to. And if Iowa wants to put themselves in a spot to get a 12-team playoff, they've got to win 9. You got to win 9. That's plain and simple. You got to win 9 at least. So that's where they sit. Wisconsin currently with a team total of 6.5. That's Fickell's second year. They brought in Tyler Van Dyke. They brought in pieces. That's a rival we'd love to beat again. And I think Wisconsin's still kind of grinding through that. And they didn't get any help with their schedule, right? They've got Alabama, USC, Penn State, Oregon, Nebraska, and Iowa all on their schedule. So they got a little tougher road that's reflected in the 6.5 rather than a 7.5 you usually get out of a Wisconsin program. They'll be good. They'll be solid. Their quarterback situation has got to get figured out, because Van Dyke has this history of turnovers. And if he's doing that in a Fickell offense in the Big Ten, it's going to be really tough for them to win football games. Nebraska currently sitting at 7.5 wins. This is probably the easiest schedule Nebraska's had in a while, if that means anything, just my 2 cents worth. UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, Ohio State, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Iowa. 7.5 wins. I mean, you're probably going to Illinois 3-0, or hosting Illinois 3-0 or 2-1, depending on how Colorado is this year. Coming out of Illinois 4-0, at Purdue 5-0. Like, Rutgers, Indiana, Ohio State, like, there's a chance Nebraska's sitting here 6-0 legitimately, and people are starting to think that it's the second coming again. But that's, again, if we're going to overhype Nebraska in the preseason, we're leaning into stuff we don't need to. That's just every year we do this stuff. 4.5 for Minnesota. It is hard for me to see Minnesota be very good. I think they brought in the Brosmer kid from New Hampshire, who's going to be a good quarterback. The offensive line will be pretty solid. The defense will be okay. that just the playmaking ability in the backfield and on the outside is just non-existent up there. And I don't think Fleck is in a good spot with that program, but it's kind of where we're at right now. Again, pay attention to the offensive line news. If you get anything there, pay attention to the quarterback room. That's where we really need to lock in within the spring, and where I want to hear most of the news come from. And hopefully we get more of that in the next presser or two, and then lock into the spring game, and we'll review all of that stuff. But thanks for tuning into the short one. I know it was a little bit late, but it was nice to get one out there. So appreciate everybody tuning in, and go Hawks.